When I first heard them laughing about turning my bedroom into the dog's room, while I was still sleeping in it, I thought maybe I'd misheard. But no, they rolled in the new dog bed, shoved my dresser into the hallway and said, "You'll be more comfortable downstairs anyway." That's when I knew. I might not be the one they respect, but I am the one who owns the house. And I was about to remind them. They say old people forget things. But I remember everything. I remember the scent of this house the day we moved in. Fresh paint and worn leather, with Joe's cologne still lingering on his collar. I remember the wallpaper we argued about, and the years we scraped together pennies just to lay down the hardwood floor. I remember Brian's first steps right by the stairs, the exact spot where he later dropped his firstborn's pacifier and blamed it on me. I even remember the first time I saw Rebecca, all heels and hairspray, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But most of all, I remember the moment they gave my bedroom to the dog. And I was still in it. It started with a knock. Not a polite one, a tap-tap. Fast and impatient, like I was a guest in a hotel taking too long to check out. "Maureen?" Rebecca's voice called from behind the door. "Can we talk?" I was already awake. I don't sleep well anymore. The mattress sags a bit on the left side, and my joints do more complaining than resting these days. "Come in," I said, adjusting my housecoat over my nightgown. The door swung open, and in walked Rebecca, my daughter-in-law of 12 years, in yoga pants that had never seen a gym, holding a coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. "We were thinking," she began, not even looking up. "It might be easier for you if we move you downstairs. The stairs, you know, they're a hazard at your age." At my age, she always says it like that. Never because you're older or to help you out, just at your age. Like I'm a car part gone rusty. I raised an eyebrow. "Easier how?" She looked around the room like she was surveying a rental. "Well, this room gets the best light, and it's closer to the kids." And she trailed off. That's when I noticed the dog. Their oversized golden retriever, Hank, wagging his tail like he owned the place, nosing a brand new dog bed that was already halfway through the doorway. "You're putting the dog in here?" I asked. Rebecca sipped her coffee. "Oh well, just while he's recovering. His leg, you know, he needs a quiet space." And the vet said, "Where's my dresser?" I interrupted. She blinked. "Oh, we moved it to the hallway. There's a storage unit downstairs we cleaned out for you. We even set up a bed. A bed. Not your bed, just a bed. Like one they'd put in a nursing home and call it charity." I looked down at my hands, wrinkled sure, but still steady, and I thought about the deed. You see, this house is still mine. Joe and I bought it in 1974. For two. Back then that was more than we had. We raised Brian here. We paid off the mortgage. We built the garden in the back and buried the dog under the apple tree when he passed. When Joe died 5 years ago, everything came to me, including this house. But when Brian lost his job and said they just needed a place to land, I said yes. Of course I did. What mother wouldn't? They moved in with their 2 kids and the dog. What I didn't know was that over time, I would stop being Maureen and start being the babysitter. They didn't say it right away, of course. It started with small things, asking me to just watch the kids for a bit when they ran errands. Then it was full afternoons, then school drop-offs, meals, diaper changes. And when I tried to rest, they said I was slowing down. When I offered advice, they said I was stuck in the past. I still remember the night I asked Brian, "Do you think maybe I could have Sundays to myself?" He looked at me like I'd asked for a yacht. "Ma, you live here rent-free," he said. "Can't you help out a little?" I didn't say what I was thinking then, that they lived here rent-free, that I paid the taxes, that the electric bill was still in my name. But I let it go, because love lets things go, until it doesn't. That morning, I shuffled down the stairs. My slippers brushed each step like a slow metronome. At the bottom, Rebecca had lit one of her expensive candles, the kind that smells like eucalyptus and superiority. "Look," she said, gesturing proudly at the cramped room off the laundry space. "We even painted it sage." Sage. They'd painted it without asking. Covered over the old toy shelves I'd left for the grandkids. Replaced the window curtain with blackout panels. The only light in the room came from a small table lamp that flickered slightly when turned on, and in the middle sat a twin bed with one flat pillow. Like I was boarding at a halfway house, Rebecca stood there waiting for my approval. Like she'd done me a favor. "Thank you," I said softly. Her smile grew. "See, it's better this way." I nodded once. Then I closed the door behind me, and I started planning. The first call I made was to Cynthia. She's my old neighbor, 2 doors down. Her niece is a real estate attorney. "I'm not selling," I told her. "I just need options." Options for what she didn't ask. She didn't have to. That's the thing about old friends. They don't need the full story, just a tone in your voice is enough. The second call was to Terrence, Joe's godson. He and his husband had just gotten out of a bad rental situation and were looking for somewhere safe to land. "You ever think of owning a home?" I asked. There was a long silence. Then, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. I spent the next few days gathering papers. Birth certificates, tax records, the original deed. I even found Joe's old notary stamp, though I knew I couldn't use it. Every night while they watched Netflix upstairs and the dog rolled around on my old bed, I worked under the flicker of that table lamp. Writing, highlighting, filing, and remembering. Not out of spite, not really, but out of survival. Because if they were willing to erase me for a dog, then I needed to write myself back into the story. Permanently. That Sunday they hosted a barbecue in the backyard. Rebecca wore a sundress and called me Mama Rini in front of her friends like we were best pals. Brian grilled steaks like he owned the place. And me, I sat on the porch swing, sipping iced tea and watching the breeze rustle the apple tree. The same tree Joe planted with his bare hands. The same one they wanted to cut down for a fire pit last fall. I felt the envelope in my sweater pocket. The one sealed with my new will and the amended deed transfer. And I smiled, because while they laughed over drinks and made plans for my garden and my bedroom, I already had my own plan, and they weren't part of it. There's something funny about silence. It used to comfort me. Back when Joe was alive, we'd sit in the living room, without saying a word. Just the sound of the clock ticking and our feet touching on the ottoman. That kind of silence was warm. But now, silence follows me like a ghost in my own home. It's not warm anymore. It's cold, like the kind that comes before a storm. That Monday morning, after the barbecue, I heard nothing. Not even a good morning from Rebecca. Not even a grunt from Brian. Just the clatter of dog nails across the hardwood above me, where my bedroom used to be. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, lacing my shoes. I didn't rush. People don't expect old women to hurry, and that works in my favor. I looked in the mirror above the laundry sink and smoothed back the sides of my hair. Still neat, still sharp, like me. At 10 Avon sharp, I took the bus into town. I still had my driver's license, but Rebecca said I shouldn't be driving anymore. "Your reflexes are getting slower, Maureen," she told me last year. "It's just not safe." So I gave up the car keys. But I didn't give up going places. When I arrived at the law office, the receptionist blinked in surprise. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have a file," I said, holding up the thick folder wrapped in a rubber band. She gave me a tight smile. "I'm not sure if—" "Tell Miss Berman that Maureen Jacobs is here," I said. "He'll want to see me." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a round man in a navy blazer, who smelled faintly of menthol and lemon drops. Mr. Berman had been Joe's friend for 4. His father handled our closing on this house back in the 70s. Maureen, he said, blinking behind his glasses. What brings you in? I placed the folder on his desk and opened it. Inside were copies of the deed, the tax receipts, and a handwritten letter I'd rewritten 4 times until every word sat exactly where it needed to. I want to transfer the property, I said. He frowned. To Brian? I shook my head. No. To someone else. He raised an eyebrow. That'll cause a storm. I'm counting on it, I said. That afternoon when I returned, Rebecca was on the phone in the kitchen. I heard her before I saw her. And she doesn't even do anything anymore, she said. She just stays in the basement and wanders around like a ghost. We're basically her full-time caregivers. I swear, if we weren't here, she'd probably starve. I froze behind the hallway wall. Can you believe she still thinks this is her house? She went on. She acts like we owe her something. It's pathetic. The kettle on the stove screamed. She didn't move to turn it off. I stepped forward. I'm home, I said. Rebecca spun. Startled, she fumbled with the kettle and lowered the flame. Oh. Didn't hear you come in, she said, too sweet. I didn't reply. I walked past her, picked up the mail on the counter, most of it junk, and took it downstairs. But one envelope was from Berman's office. Inside was the formal draft of the transfer, ready for signatures. I stared at it for a long time, thinking. Then I made my third call. Terrence arrived 3 days later. He pulled into the driveway in a used silver sedan. He looked thinner than I remembered, with more lines around his mouth and new glasses. But when he saw me standing on the porch, his face lit up like he was still 5 years old, running through the sprinkler in our yard. He hugged me hard. God, Auntie Mo, he said. You look good. You look hungry, I replied. Come inside. We walked through the house and I could feel the shift in energy. Immediately, Rebecca's eyes narrowed the second she saw him. Brian just looked confused. This is Joe's godson, I said lightly. He's visiting for a bit. Rebecca looked him up and down. You should have asked first. No, I said. I shouldn't have. Terrence stayed in the guest room, not the basement. That was important. That night, over stew and cornbread, we talked like we used to, about the neighborhood, about his work. He ran a tutoring center now, and about how fast time moved. I can't believe you're giving me this chance, he said, voice low. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll treat it better than they did, I replied. He nodded. I already do. By Friday, Rebecca was snapping. She cornered me while I folded towels in the laundry room. Is he moving in? She asked, arms crossed. No, I said. He's taking over. Taking over what? I looked her in the eye. The house. For a second I thought she might laugh, but then she saw I wasn't smiling. You're bluffing. I picked up the last towel. You really think I'd give my bedroom to a dog and call that bluffing? She stormed out. Later that night, I heard them fighting upstairs. Not quietly. Not even trying to hide it. She's not right in the head, Rebecca said. She owns the place. Brian snapped back. I closed my door and turned on my fan to drown it out. I slept well for the first time in months. The next week was filled with movement. Terrence came with his partner, Michael, a tall man with a gentle voice who shook my hand like I was royalty. They walked the backyard, looked at the garden, and asked about renovations. I want you to make it yours, I told them, and I meant it. Rebecca, meanwhile, kept her distance. Brian tried to act normal, but his eyes were tight. The kids were the only ones who didn't seem to care, Ellie sat in my lap every afternoon and colored, while Joey begged Terrence to play soccer with him. Funny how kids know where the love is. They don't need explanations, just warmth. On the morning of the signing, I dressed with care. Blue cardigan, pearl earrings, the same loafers I wore the day Joe and I closed on the house all those years ago. At the dining room table, I laid out the documents. Brian came in halfway through. He froze when he saw the papers. "You're really doing this?" I nodded. "I am." He sat down across from me, face pale. "But it's our home." "No," I said softly. "It was my home. You just stopped treating it like one." Rebecca stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." When Terrence signed the papers, there was no grand ceremony, just a few pen strokes and a notary's stamp, but it felt like fireworks in my chest. I'd given away the house, yes, but I'd taken back my word. I looked around one last time at the walls I painted, the floors I swept, the stairs I climbed for 40 years. Then I looked at Rebecca. "Don't worry," I said. "You have 30 days. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out, and I walked away. The funny thing about consequences is how quiet they are at first. You expect shouting, tears, a slammed door at least. But in my house, the day after the deed transfer, there was only silence, a deep, uncomfortable silence. Even the dog seemed to pick up on the shift. Hank barely left the upstairs hallway. His tail no longer thumped against the walls like it used to. I caught him sniffing around my old room, then quietly retreating. Maybe he knew the room wasn't his anymore. Maybe he never really believed it was. Rebecca avoided me completely. For 2 days, when we passed in the hall, she turned her head like I wasn't even there, which, to be fair, had been the case for months now. Only this time, I welcomed it. Brian did what Brian always does. He played peacekeeper. He'd pop in during meals and say things like, "We all need to cool down," or "Let's just talk this through." But he never asked why I did it. That was the most telling part. He knew. They both knew. Terrence and Michael came by every afternoon, not to gloat, not to rush, but to plan and to include me in those plans. "Would you be okay if we redo the patio?" Michael asked me one morning. "The concrete's cracked, but I don't want to mess with it if it's sentimental." I smiled. Sentimental is fine, unsafe isn't. That afternoon, Terrence brought over swatches of paint colors for the living room. They were gentle, muted tones. Sage, sand, dusty blue, not loud, not flashy, respectful, considerate. The kind of colors you pick when you know a home already has a story, and you want to add to it, not erase it. It wasn't long before Rebecca lost her grip. Late one night, I heard footsteps stomping down to the basement. My door creaked open. No knock, no warning. And she stood there with her arms crossed, her face pale and furious. "You really think giving the house to them is some kind of win?" I looked up from my book. "You're in my room." Her jaw clenched. "You're petty, vindictive." I set the book down calmly. "You gave my bedroom to a dog. What did you think would happen?" She laughed. A bitter, joyless sound. "It wasn't permanent. You're acting like we evicted you. You didn't have to say the word," I said. "Your actions were loud." Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, like she was too tired to stand upright. "You didn't even give us a chance to fix it." I met her eyes. "You had years." The next morning, I made pancakes for the kids. Joey insisted on chocolate chips, and Ellie wanted hers shaped like hearts. "Grandma, is the house still ours?" Joey asked between bites. I didn't lie, but I didn't explain everything either. "It'll always be your home when you want to visit," I said gently. They didn't question it. Kids don't need contracts to know love is still in the room. Brian finally asked to talk on the back porch that night. It was cold, so we both brought blankets. He sat across from me, hunched over like a teenager again. I should have said something, he began. When Rebecca started acting like this place was hers, I should have pushed back, but you didn't, I said. He nodded slowly. I guess I didn't want the fight. It was easier to just keep the peace. I stared out at the apple tree. That's the thing about peace, I said. When it only benefits one side, it's not really peace. It's silence. He didn't answer, just pulled his blanket tighter. I don't hate you, Brian, I said after a while. I just needed to be seen again. His eyes welled up, but he blinked it away. I'm sorry, Ma, I nodded. That was enough. Not to undo everything, but enough for now. Rebecca, on the other hand, never apologized. She went from icy silence to loud complaints, calls with her sister, passive-aggressive texts. At one point I overheard her say, "She's not in her right mind. I bet she's been manipulated." Manipulated. Imagine thinking I need someone else's help to protect myself in my own home. I may be 74, but my mind is sharper than most of these overworked mothers, with 3 screens open and no time to look up from their phones. With the deed officially transferred, Terrence and Michael began the next phase. Renovations. Not massive ones, just thoughtful improvements. They gave notice to Brian and Rebecca that the property would soon be owner-occupied. 30 days to move out. That was fair. That was legal. Rebecca tried to protest, of course. This is elder abuse, she told Terrence one afternoon, voice dripping with false concern. Terrence didn't flinch. The only elder I see being abused is the one you made sleep in the basement. I couldn't help but smile when he said it. Even the dogs seemed to sigh with relief. The kids cried when they were told they had to move. It broke my heart. Not because I wanted them gone. I didn't. But because the people who should have protected their home had been too selfish to see what they were risking. Rebecca stormed around for a week, slamming cabinets, threatening to get a lawyer. But she never did, because deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't about revenge. This was about respect. And respect isn't optional when you live under someone else's roof, especially when that someone built the damn thing. A week before their move-out deadline, I came upstairs and stood in the doorway of my old room. It had been cleared out, the dog's bed gone. My dresser still missing, of course, but the walls were bare again. Rebecca walked by behind me and scoffed. Is it satisfying, watching us pack? I turned to face her. No, I said. It's sad. She rolled her eyes. You could have just talked to us, you know, she muttered. I took a deep breath. I did. You just didn't listen. And with that, I went back downstairs. That night, Terrence made dinner. He and Michael had brought over lasagna and salad. They set the table, lit candles, and poured glasses of wine like it was Thanksgiving. This house is going to have good energy again, Michael said, clinking his glass with mine. I looked around the dining room, at the worn table Joe and I picked out from a catalog, the scuff marks on the floor from years of little feet, the crooked picture frame I never bothered fixing. Good, I said. That's all I ever wanted. The morning they moved out, it rained. Brian hugged me before getting in the car. His eyes were bloodshot. The kids waved from the back seat. Rebecca didn't look at me once. The car pulled away. I stood on the porch, alone, but not lonely. There's a difference. Terrence came out and handed me a cup of coffee. You okay? I nodded. For the first time in a long time. He smiled and wrapped an arm around my shoulder. The house behind us creaked in the wind, old bones settling into peace. The day after they moved out, The house was so quiet it almost hurt. No thudding upstairs, no clatter of morning dishes, no arguing behind closed doors or kids begging for attention that never came. Just the creak of floorboards and the steady tick of the grandfather clock Joe installed 40 years ago, and for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel cold, it felt clean. I walked from room to room with a cup of tea in hand, barefoot on the hardwood floor. I paused by the window in the upstairs bedroom, my bedroom, and stared out at the front lawn, where the dog used to dig and the kids used to chase each other in circles. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze. They hadn't taken much with them, just their clothes, the dog's crate, and a few framed photos. Everything else had been bought on my dime anyway. Furniture I'd kept from Joe, dishes I'd replaced when Rebecca broke mine, towels they never returned to the closet. It's funny how people can take over a space without owning a single thing in it, and even funnier how fast they disappear when you take that space back. Terrence and Michael moved in that weekend. They didn't throw a party, no loud music, no champagne corks popping, just quiet, steady work. They painted the laundry room. They patched a leaky faucet in the guest bath. They pulled weeds from the garden, and every night, they made dinner, real meals, not frozen boxes. The house smelled like roasted garlic, fresh basil, and warm bread. It smelled like a home again. "You sure you don't want us to put you back in the master?" Michael asked one night. "It's your house too." I shook my head. "I've grown fond of the downstairs. Besides, it's easier on the knees." He smiled, but I could tell he understood. I didn't need the bedroom to feel like I mattered. I just needed the people around me to treat me like I did. The legal side of things wrapped up quickly. The house was now fully under Terrence and Michael's names. But with one important detail, I had life estate rights. That meant I could live here as long as I wanted. No one could kick me out. No one could move me around like a pawn on a board. It was still my home, but now shared with people who appreciated it, who appreciated me, and that, my lawyer said, was smart planning. I just called it peace of mind. Of course, Brian called a few weeks later. He didn't say hello, just started in with a sigh. "Ma, I just don't get it." I sat in the armchair by the window, phone to my ear, cup of tea on the side table. "Don't get what?" "You chose them over us." I let the silence stretch. "I chose myself," I said eventually. "For once, you didn't even talk to us about it." I smiled faintly. "I did. You just weren't listening." There was another long pause on his end. I imagined him rubbing his temples like he used to during finals week. I don't know how to explain this to the kids." "You don't have to explain anything," I said softly. "Just tell them the truth, that Grandma finally stood up for herself." Then I hung up. Not out of spite, just to finally have the last word. One afternoon, I found Ellie's tiny pink sock tucked behind the dryer. I held it in my hand for a long time. It was worn thin at the heel. The elastic stretched out. A part of me ached. Not because I missed Rebecca or even Brian, but because I missed the moments that used to be mine. The bedtime stories, the snuggles during thunderstorms, the giggles while baking cookies. Those kids never meant harm. They just grew up in a house where the adults forgot who made it possible. I placed the sock in a small box I kept in the closet, alongside Joe's last birthday card, a drawing Joey made of me with spiky purple hair, and the note Terrence wrote me the night he moved in. "Thank you for giving us a home, not just a house." That fall we hosted a neighborhood potluck. Terrence set up string lights in the backyard. Michael grilled chicken and laid out tablecloths in the colors of autumn. I made my famous apple crumble and watched as people trickled in, one by one, each holding something wrapped in foil or carried in a casserole dish. Some of them had avoided us after Brian moved in, unsure how to act, but now they came freely, laughing, hugging, talking like we hadn't missed years between. And I realized then, You don't have to accept bad behavior just because it comes from family. You can build a new one that chooses you, one that honors you, one that doesn't need reminding whose name was on the mortgage. Later that night, as the last guests filtered out and the candles burned low, I sat with Terence on the porch swing. The stars were out. Crisp air nipped at our cheeks. The apple tree swayed gently, its last leaves drifting down. I can't believe how fast this place turned around, he said, sipping hot cider. I chuckled. It's always been good. Just needed the right people in it. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. You're the heart of this home, you know. I looked out at the yard, the porch, the glowing windows. I finally feel like it, I said. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Ellie. The handwriting was uneven, the letters big and loopy. Dear Grandma, I miss you. I like my new school, but not as much as being with you. Mommy says we might not visit for a while. I hope that's not forever, love. Ellie. I pressed the paper to my chest. No, sweetheart. It's not forever. Not if I can help it. I wrote back the same day and enclosed a drawing of our old cookie recipes, because no matter what happened between me and her parents, I would always be her grandmother, and I'd always have warm cookies waiting. I suppose people expected me to feel guilty. Neighbors, distant cousins, even the pastor at the church I hadn't attended since before COVID dropped by once and tried to talk to me about forgiveness. Sometimes, he said, shifting awkwardly in the chair across from me, a family is hurting more than it lets on. Pride keeps us from reaching out. I sipped my tea. Sometimes, I replied, family lets pride turn into permission. He blinked. I offered him another cookie. He declined. Didn't come back after that. The mail came heavy that month. Not with bills or ads. Those were always there. But with tension. Brian sent 2 letters. One was short, typed and distant. He wanted to reopen the discussion about the transfer. He said there might be a path forward, as if this were a business deal, and not the fallout of years of silent cruelty. The second was longer, handwritten, emotional. He talked about his job search, about how hard things were for him and Rebecca. He said they were bouncing between temporary apartments. The kids were struggling with the new school. The dog missed the yard. I read every word carefully, then folded it, slid it into a drawer, and left it there. Because it wasn't that I didn't care, I just didn't owe them anything anymore. One morning, as golden leaves started tumbling down the driveway, Michael surprised me with something small but meaningful. I found your dresser, he said, holding up his phone. It was in the garage, behind those old tires. I followed him out back. There it was, my solid maple dresser, with the rounded edges. Joe sanded himself, covered in dust, a knob missing, but still mine. He brought it inside, cleaned it up, and replaced the knob. I didn't say much, just ran my fingers along the top, and nodded. He understood. No big speech needed. Some furniture holds more than clothes. That weekend Terence installed a lock on my door. Not the basement door. Not the guest room. The door to my bedroom. Upstairs. We figured it's time, he said, handing me a tiny gold key. It was silly in a way. I didn't need to lock my door anymore. There was no one barging in, no one moving furniture behind my back, no one assigning me to a different part of the house like I was luggage. But I kept that key on a chain around my neck, not for security, for dignity. It was mine again. All of it. I decided to have a yard sale a few days later. It wasn't to make money. I just needed to clear out the remnants, the pieces that still smelled like resentment and entitlement. Rebecca's glass vases, the dog's half-chewed toys, Brian's giant speakers he never used but refused to part with. Neighbors came in waves, some wide-eyed, others cautious, One older couple pointed at a box of kitchen gadgets. "Didn't your family just move in last year?" the woman asked. "They moved out," I said. "Oh," she replied. "Are you selling the house?" "Nope," I said with a smile. "I gave it away." She blinked, and I moved on to the next customer. Later that day, Ellie and Joey showed up, unannounced. Rebecca's sister had dropped them off. Apparently she lived nearby and was watching them for the weekend. Ellie ran into my arms so fast I nearly toppled over. "Gran," she squealed. Joey followed close behind, holding a small plastic bag with cookies he had tried to make himself. They were half-burnt and oddly shaped. Dad said, "You might not want to see us," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I knelt down and hugged him tight. "There's nothing in this world that would ever make me stop wanting to see you," I whispered. Their eyes lit up. I invited them in. We baked that afternoon. I let Ellie wear my apron, and Joey cracked all the eggs. The kitchen turned into a floury, sugary mess, and I didn't mind a bit. At one point, Ellie looked up at me and asked, "Are we allowed to be here?" My chest tightened. "Yes," I said firmly. "You will always be allowed to be here." She nodded and went back to stirring the batter, as if that simple sentence put her world right again. Children should never be made to feel like guests in their own memories. When Rebecca found out, she called me, not Brian. Rebecca. She never liked phones, always preferred emails and text. But this time she called. "You went behind our backs," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "Your sister dropped them off. I didn't call anyone. They're our kids." "Yes," I said. "And they're my grandkids. You don't get to decide when you're part of their lives." "Actually," I replied, "you don't get to decide that either. Not anymore." She sputtered something about custody and rules. I didn't hang up on her, but I let her words fade into static as I set the phone down and returned to the kitchen, where the cookies were ready, and two children were waiting with bright, flour-dusted smiles. That night, Terrence brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years, one of the thick leather-bound ones Joe used to organize. We sat around the fireplace, flipping through pages, black and white baby pictures, Joe in his army uniform, Brian blowing out birthday candles with frosting on his nose. Michael asked questions. The kids listened with wide eyes, and I felt something deep in my chest crack open. Not from pain, but from peace. The kind that grows back after a long drought. Before bed, Ellie asked if she could sleep in my room. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. We curled up together under my quilt. She snuggled close, her tiny hand resting over mine. "Grandma," she whispered, "can we come again next weekend?" I kissed her forehead. "Any time, sweetheart. This house is yours too." It had been 2 months since they moved out. 2 months since peace returned to my house. You'd think I'd still be angry at Rebecca, at Brian. But honestly, I wasn't. Anger burns fast. It flares, then fizzles. What lasts longer is disappointment. But even that had begun to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Security. I wasn't waiting to be yelled at in my own kitchen. I wasn't tiptoeing around dog bowls or dirty laundry. I wasn't lying awake at night, wondering if I'd be treated like a burden in the morning. I was home. Really. Finally home. The kids started visiting every other weekend. Rebecca hated it. I knew. But legally, she couldn't stop them. Not unless she wanted to drag her own children into a custody fight she couldn't win. Besides, Brian was more passive than ever. He dropped them off, barely spoke, and left quickly. Sometimes he brought Joey's old cleats or Ellie's favorite books, but he never came inside. Not that I minded. The house felt warmer without him. One Friday evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, I heard a knock on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood a woman in her 50s. She wore a brown wool coat and held a leather tote. Her expression was polite, but firm. "Hi, are you Maureen Jacobs?" "I am," I said cautiously. She extended a business card. "Sandra Klein. I'm an attorney representing Brian Jacobs." I stared at the card, then looked back up at her. "You're here on a Friday night?" She smiled tightly. "We figured we'd catch you before the weekend." I stepped aside. "Come in. But don't expect coffee." She walked in, sat at the edge of the couch, and opened her bag. "Your son is requesting mediation," she said. "He believes he was coerced out of his rightful inheritance." I didn't blink. He was never promised anything. "He claims you discussed transferring the house to him, and that your sudden change indicates undue influence." I laughed, slow and sharp. "You mean I changed my mind after being treated like furniture?" "I'm not here to argue," she said quickly. "Just to inform." "Well," I replied, "consider me informed. Now get out of my house." She left without another word. I didn't watch her go. I had a better idea. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Terrence and Michael, and told them everything. "I don't want this house tied up in court," I said. "Not after what we've built here." Michael nodded. "We'll talk to Berman, get ahead of it." Terrence looked angrier than I'd ever seen him. "This isn't about property to them," he said. "It's about power." I reached over and patted his hand. "Then let's remind them who holds it now." By Monday, our lawyer had drafted a letter concise, factual, firm. It laid out the timeline, the deed transfer, the notarized documents, and my full mental competency during the process. He included the photos from the basement, where I'd been made to sleep. The text messages Rebecca had sent me last Christmas, that read, "Don't expect a gift. You're lucky we let you stay here at all," and a copy of the life estate clause that proved no one could force me out. When Sandra Klein received the response, she called my lawyer directly. "We'll be dropping the matter," she said. Of course they would. They never had a case, just entitlement. Still, something in me felt unsettled. Even with the legal drama behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca hadn't let go. She was the type who couldn't stand being outmaneuvered. She always had to have the last word, and if she couldn't win, she'd at least make you suffer. I half expected her to show up at the front door with the dog again. But weeks passed, and nothing came. Not until I found out about the letter. It was Ellie who brought it up. One Sunday morning, we were baking banana bread, and she was standing on the little stool by the counter, stirring too fast, and sending flour everywhere. "Mom said you gave the house to strangers," she said. Matter of fact, I froze. "Stranger," she said. "You don't care about us anymore," Joey added from the table, coloring a picture of the backyard. I wiped my hands on a towel and crouched next to them. "You two know I love you, right?" They both nodded, wide-eyed. I took a breath. "Terrence isn't a stranger. He's family. He was like a son to me before your dad even met your mom." "But he's not your real son," Ellie said. "No," I said softly. "But sometimes the family you choose treats you better than the one you're born into." That night, I wrote Rebecca a letter. Not angry, not accusatory. Just honest. I told her the damage was done. That trying to turn the children against me would only make her lonelier. That the only person she was hurting was herself. And I ended it with one sentence. "You may not respect me, Rebecca, but your children do." I never mailed it. I didn't need to, just writing it was enough. The seasons changed again. The garden bloomed in spring. We planted tomatoes and snap peas and sunflowers taller than Joey. Michael built a birdhouse and Terence taught Ellie how to use a watering can. The laughter returned to the yard. Not loud, obnoxious laughter. Gentle laughter. Real joy. One afternoon, while I was trimming lavender, Michael walked over with a cup of lemonade. "I have something to ask you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. He smiled. "Would you like to be our witness?" "For what?" "Our wedding." I blinked, then laughed so hard I nearly dropped the pruning shears. "Yes," I said. 1,000 times yes. We held the ceremony in the backyard. Close friends, white chairs, fresh flowers in mason jars. The sun set just as they said their vows, casting golden light over everything. I wore the same dress I wore to my 40th anniversary with Joe. Deep green silk, and a little snug now, but still beautiful. As I stood beside them while they signed the license, I felt something settle in my chest, a knot I didn't realize I'd been carrying. It wasn't just about the house, it was about the legacy. And now I knew it was in the right hands. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were clean, I sat alone on the porch. The wind was warm. The stars were clear. Terence joined me, holding 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" I looked at him and smiled. About how I gave everything away and somehow ended up with more than I started. He leaned back in the chair beside me, letting out a long breath. "I think Joe would have been proud." I stared out at the yard, glowing softly in the moonlight. "He always wanted a home full of love." Terence clinked his cup to mine. "Well," he said, "mission accomplished." There's something sacred about a Sunday morning when you know the world is finally quiet. No storms on the horizon, no letters in the mailbox threatening to shake your peace. Just the soft rustle of wind through the trees, the warmth of a blanket across your lap, and the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the kitchen. That's where I am now, sitting in my chair by the window, watching the house. My house do what it was always meant to do: hold love, protect dignity, make space for joy. It's been a full year since Rebecca and Brian moved out, a whole year since the dog's bed replaced mine, since the upstairs was reclaimed, since I made the quiet, firm decision to take my life back, and not once have I regretted it. Not even when the kids cry at drop-off, not even when Brian sends clip texts about school events he thinks I should be invited to, or not. Because here's the truth. Once someone shows you where you stand in their life, believe them. And once you decide you deserve better, don't look back. Rebecca sent a Christmas card. No note, just a stock photo of the family. Her, Brian, the kids, and the dog, all sitting stiffly on a bench in matching sweaters. At the bottom, "Happy Holidays from the Jacobs family." I placed it in a drawer with the rest of the things I no longer needed to see. You don't have to hate someone to stop letting them hurt you. You just have to close the door and lock it. Ellie and Joey come over twice a month now. Sometimes more when their aunt is willing to drop them off. We bake, we plant, we read. Sometimes they help Terence and Michael in the garden. Sometimes they help me sort old photographs, asking about each one with wide-eyed wonder. They've learned more about their heritage in this house than they ever did when they lived here full-time, because now there's time, and intention, and respect. One afternoon, Joey found an old key in the drawer of my desk. "What's this for?" he asked. I held it between my fingers, the metal warm from the sun. "It used to unlock a door I wasn't allowed to have." He tilted his head. "But it's your house." I smiled. "Exactly." He didn't understand. Not fully, but someday he will. When someone tries to tell him he doesn't belong in his own life, and he'll remember that Grandma didn't let anyone decide her worth. We held a barbecue this summer. Nothing fancy, just neighbors, A few folding chairs, the smell of grilled corn and brisket in the air. People kept asking if I missed having real family around, and every time I pointed to Michael, laughing with a spatula in one hand, to Terence, setting up the drink cooler, to Ellie, making name tags for the lemonade cups, to Joey, helping me carry napkins. "This is real," I said, and I meant it. Blood doesn't make a family, loyalty does, love does. As the sun set that evening, Terence pulled out an envelope. "I've been holding on to this," he said. "Didn't know if I should give it to you." I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, a picture taken years ago. Me, Joe, Brian, as a boy, sitting in front of the fireplace, Joe's arm wrapped around me, a half-finished puzzle on the table. There was a note taped to the back in Joe's handwriting. "Make sure she gets the house if anything ever happens to me." I read it twice, then a third time. Tears welled up. Not because I was sad, but because somewhere in my bones, I already knew. He built this home for me. He wanted it to be mine. Always. That night, I placed the photo on the mantel, not as a trophy, not as proof that I won, but as a reminder that I was never crazy for fighting to keep my place. That love doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's written in a quiet note, taped to the back of a photo, tucked away in a drawer until the right moment. Sometimes it's baked into the walls of a house, waiting for someone to remember it, and I did. Rebecca hasn't visited. Brian came by once. Awkwardly, he stood at the end of the walkway like he wasn't sure if he should even knock. He looked older, thinner, less sure of himself. "He didn't bring the kids. I just came to say, I get it," he said. I nodded. That was enough. He turned to leave, then paused. "Are you happy?" I looked around at the flower pots, the swing, the porch lights glowing warmly as twilight set in. "Yes," I said, "for the first time in a very long time." And now here I am, 1 year later, in my house, in my chair, in my peace. They gave my bedroom to the dog, so I gave the deed to someone who remembered, whose name was carved into the wood of the front door. Not with a plaque or a plate, but with sweat and years and love. I may not have loud victories, but I have quiet ones, and those are the ones that